Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me go straight into the argument that I want to make tonight. One of the great challenges, obviously, facing the country is how, at a time of tight public expenditure restraint, we can still deliver high-quality public services, services which the individual user, looks, feels, and is as good as, indeed hopefully better, than the ones they enjoy today. My argument is that done properly, the effective devolution of power, leadership and accountability to strong elected local authorities will be key. I want to set out how this might be done and what it would look like. It is, of course, the case that all parties often speak the language of devolution and often most ferociously when in opposition. We might leave aside the Conservatives' history of being certainly themselves more in favour of decentralisation than they ever have been in government. You may skirt round the inconvenient truth that the Conservatives' main decentralising policy is to pass legislation in Westminster to force cities to have referendum on mayors, whether there's any local support for this or not. Or as the Chazo Chief Secretary said today, the Conservatives would be unashamedly top down in dictating cuts to local services if they took office. Nonetheless, let's take it for tonight that both major parties are talking the language of devolution and decentralisation. But even leaving aside those slightly cynical comments of mine, there are fundamental differences in the approach to local devolution between the Labour government and the Conservative opposition. And understanding those differences is crucial to challenging the culture of intellectual pessimism which is rising at present, a culture which allows no improvement, only a grim future of cutting spending coupled to aiming lower and achieving less. Of course, money is going to be tight, but that is no reason for lowering our sights. It simply makes it even more important that we make the right choices to best tackle the challenges we face. We will still want to house everyone well. We can still tackle inequality if we want to. We will remain a society where the public realm and a decent environment are the right of everyone. And we will be a society which can continue to tackle climate change if we choose, and indeed we have no alternative. The way we organise our public services and the way we use our resources will be crucial. And ultimately, as almost all services are delivered at local level, it is at local level that we need to make the best arrangements. Now, over the past 12 years, the Labour government has driven improvement and public service reform through each of the main public services. We had a period of intense and centrally directed targets aimed at focusing services which often had little clear notion of quality. Government policy has increasingly moved on, involving more consumer choice, slimmed down and more strategic performance measures, diversity of providers, and a renewed emphasis on local decisions and leadership. And the results over that period of time are clear. School standards are up, with 65% of students now getting 5 good GCSEs. In 1997, it was just 45%. Services for patients are improving, with over 89,000 more nurses and 44,000 more doctors. The British Crime Survey shows that overall crime is down by 36%. And it's not just within individual public services that progress has been made. Much productive effort has been put into the development of local partnerships across services. From the early introduction of crime reduction partnerships onwards, it's been clear the success depends on services working well together. But the challenge of making the best use of all public service spending in each local area is still the real frontier territory of public service reform, and it will only be conquered by effective, strong and accountable local government. Last July, in a document called Strengthening Local Democracy, I began to outline the crucial role local authorities could play in doing just that. Today, I want to confirm that direction of travel and to outline some of the next steps. Over the past decade, there has been a steady and sustained transfer of power to local authorities. It's included cutting the red tape that came attached to ring-fence money, giving greater stability and certainty through the 3-year financial settlement, cutting the number of targets and rationalising inspection regimes to focus on delivering what really matters, extending financial flexibility through prudential borrowing, giving more freedom and flexibility to innovate, and ensuring that local authorities have expansive powers to promote the economic and social and environmental well-being of their areas, and giving local authorities power and responsibility to shape more of the issues which matter to local people. In my own previous department, I oversaw the transfer of over £500 million of funding each year and responsibilities for young people's education, for informal learning and for English as a second language, all enabling councils to shape educational opportunities for everyone in their area. Over the summer, we took steps to give councils a greater role in meeting housing needs in their area, with greater flexibility to fund housing and a revitalised role in actually building new homes. And most recently, at the Labour Party conference, the Prime Minister made a major announcement about the funding of future social care in the UK, which involves the biggest shift in funding, around £450 million a year, from health to local government, and the biggest shift which has taken place since 1948. So I think all of those confirm the importance of elected local authorities to the Labour government. But it's important to be clear about the foundations of the importance of local government. It lies with individual citizens, not with the institutions themselves. The founding principle of local government is that citizens have the right to influence the decisions that affect their lives and their communities. Sometimes they may exercise this through personalised services, sometimes by influencing local services, for example, by having a direct say over how their neighbourhood is policed. And sometimes it will be through lobbying their council. But a key way in which local citizens are able to exercise that right is their ability to elect a strong local council which can lead and shape their area. And that's why the role of councillors and councils, with their unique democratic mandate, is critical to making sure that local services are responsive to the needs of local communities. Citizens have a right to have their voices heard and to expect those delivering services to care what they think. But councils must be fully equipped with the powers they need to act decisively and effectively on behalf of their citizens, the powers and ability to scrutinise, influence and shape other services. There is a much stronger role for local government. This is a much stronger role for local government, placing it firmly at the centre of decision-making in their community. The commitment to strong local government is part and parcel of our commitment to personalised services, to a strong local voice and to entitlement for key public services. But if that's the case, why should those rights stop arbitrarily at the services delivered by local authorities themselves? Why shouldn't the citizen be able to elect councillors who can report back to them on every aspect of public services in their area? Why shouldn't their rights to challenge the quality of local services apply equally to the delivery of school and health service entitlements? Why shouldn't it be possible to have a more open debate about the best ways of providing local services and of switching resources from one service to another to achieve better outcomes? Well, of course, they should have those rights. And there are now, in my view, in the pipeline, 5 significant developments which, taken together, have the potential to transform the delivery of local services and to make each taxpayer's pound work as hard as it can. These 5 strands of reform have developed from different starting points, and it's only when you put them together that you understand how radical the government agenda is. The first is the approach of total place, and I'm grateful that Sir Michael is responding to this lecture this evening because he has been intimately involved in that project from the beginning. The idea of total place is a willingness to map all of the public service spending going into a local area, and then to ask hard questions about the best use of that money. There are 13 formal total place pilots underway. Each is concentrating on one particular theme in the area, such as children's services, antisocial behaviour, or social care. The mapping exercise is already confirming the sheer scale of total public service spending in each area. £7.5 billion a year in Birmingham, £3.4 billion in central Bedfordshire and Luton, and £4 billion in Worcestershire. The circumstances in each area are different, and more needs to be done to enable us to get definitive figures. But even if we took a 1% saving and start thinking about that, what that will mean, say, for example, in Birmingham, potentially £75 million, then it begins to explain why this is so interesting. A 1% efficiency saving across local government budgets for 2010-11 alone would see a saving in the order of £600 million. By bringing together all local services, Total Place has the potential to go much further. But it's not simply about value for money, because in each area, service providers are working collaboratively to identify how a whole area approach, bringing together all the different services in a joint effort to respond to local needs, with local authorities in a unique leadership role, can deliver better outcomes for users. You can cut out waste, overlap, duplication of effort, all helping to make sure that every pound of taxpayers' money is working as hard as it can. By putting democratically elected councillors in the driving seat, you can make sure that local needs and views are being properly served. And this approach to local public services can lead to better services at a lower cost. Our aim is that across the country, it should be possible to identify exactly how much could be saved through more effectively targeting resources at the needs of the people who rely on them. For example, investing in preventing drug and alcohol misuse at an early stage could cut later spending on antisocial behaviour, crime and offender management services. Investing more in reducing unwanted teenage pregnancies could reduce costs right through the rest of the health, education and child welfare systems. And looking at where all the money is being spent on supporting the youngest children will make sure that preventative services are really reaching out to those who need them most, cutting out the need for spending on more intensive support at school later on. So not only does it cut costs, more importantly, this approach delivers better outcomes for the people actually using those services. We're due to get an early report on the formal Total Place pilots in November, with a full analysis by next year's budget. But it's already clear from the ministerial coordinating group that I chair and from the meetings of senior officials across Whitehall that the real potential of a whole area approach is increasingly recognised. This, of course, has major implications for central government's involvement and relationship with local government. It will require major changes in the way that government manages and inspects different public services, as well as how we set targets for performance. It could mean greater alignment of performance frameworks of major services, so that bodies like the NHS, the police and local government are all clearly working towards the same goal. And government would also need to resist the temptation to tell local councils how to spend lots of different pots of public money. The pilots will give us some insight into the scale of change which could be needed. But just as importantly, this will require major cultural change among the public services involved, supporting closer working than has ever previously been achieved at all levels throughout the services. Greater use of shared services, of more innovative procurement models and joint commissioning will lead to operational efficiencies at the front line and vice versa. At a more strategic level, councils could lead other services in joint assessment and planning to make the best use of capital assets. This would mean that capital investment in schools, hospitals, housing and so on would better reflect a strategic vision for the place led by the council and properly influenced by what citizens want. And there is ministerial backing for reforms that will make this easier to deliver. While we don't want top-down reorganisations, Andy Burnham and I have given our backing to closer working between local authorities and primary care trusts, including the sharing of staff and the development of joint accountability and scrutiny arrangements. Now, London councils and PCTs are embarking on just such a programme. Total Place is unlikely to be fully effective if it is seen primarily as a managerial exercise, an upgraded approach to partnership working. That much will be essential, but it must be challenged, be gingered up by effective scrutiny. So the second element transforming local public services will be the explicit extension of local authority scrutiny powers to all public service spending in each area. This proposal has been strongly supported in our recent consultation and has won the support of ministers across government. While much scrutiny is good, Remember, the recent report on Birmingham Children's Services was a councillor-led scrutiny report into their own services. Scrutiny still remains a lion that has not yet roared. And part of the challenge function is the ability to scrutinise effectively the delivery of all local public services. People individually often don't feel they have the power or detailed knowledge to tackle service providers like the police, utility companies, or transport bosses on their own. So councillors in the scrutiny role should be able to fight their corner on local people's behalf, not as a complaint service, but as the body which has responsibility for overseeing expenditure on the delivery of local public services in an area and has the democratic authority to challenge unelected bureaucrats. So done properly, effective scrutiny is an important driver of improvements in public service delivery. The aim should be twofold: to make sure that all councils are utilising their powers of scrutiny effectively, coherently and systematically, and making sure that citizens are confident that their council is able to report back to them on the public spending in their area. The third strand of reform will be driven by the tightness of public expenditure itself. The drive for value for money will be at the top of local authority chief executives' agendas. Here there are both opportunities and threats. The opportunity is to promote an open and innovative approach to commissioning services, one that sets out the outcomes to be achieved rather than the precise service to be delivered. The threat is to go the opposite way, focusing solely on the cheapest delivery of a bog-standard service. Indeed, that approach would run entirely counter to the total place approach, to the need to look at services and spending as a whole and ask how they could be delivered better. I've established a small innovation commissioning unit in CLG, and will be making it clear to regional improvement and efficiency partnerships that they should eschew the temptation to promote the route of narrow, cheapest and unimaginative standardisation. So in future, we'll look at the whole of local public service spending. We'll equip local authorities not just to lead and to deliver, but to scrutinise the effectiveness of spending. And we'll promote the managerial cultures and commissioning practices needed to deliver real reform. The fourth strand of reform is to develop and enhance new roles for local government, including the ability to generate new income. This is not about local authorities introducing new or higher taxes. However, if money is going to be tight, local councils need to be able to generate new sources of income. There is significant room for local authorities to expand and grow their role in municipal enterprise. Stockport Council is one council already doing this by taking advantage of its powers to trade in waste and recycling facilities. But though councils doing these sorts of activities have so far generated around £1 billion, to date only a quarter of councils are doing so. I would like to see a renaissance of municipal enterprise. Such services could increase competition, delivering a better deal for consumers. And councils could use surpluses from commercial local activities to be able to generate additional sources of income. We might also explore more innovative ways of funding investment and considering new vehicles for local government to invest, for example, in social housing. There are, I believe, significant opportunities for local authorities in the transition to a low-carbon economy, in generating energy from renewable sources, as well as playing a bigger role in the provision of infrastructure for low-carbon district heating and transport schemes, and coordinating the best use of energy efficiency measures. It's also interesting to ask whether some form of local carbon budget, perhaps an extension of the existing carbon trading schemes, could provide further financial incentives to low-carbon councils. We're currently exploring the feasibility of a range of options with DEC, but while we work through the detail, I know Ed Miliband shares my enthusiasm for the leadership role of local authorities in a low-carbon economy. The low-carbon challenge is just one area where we've asked local authorities what additional legal powers they need. We're already legislating in response to the so-called Lamwell judgment in order to make it clear that local authorities can enter into mutual insurance schemes. Our general invitation to identify further areas where additional powers are needed has drawn a mixed response. Many have called for a so-called power of general competence, but there is a question of whether, once inevitable prudential restrictions are applied, this would look very different to the current power of well-being. Some have said the solution is greater clarity over existing powers. Others, however, have given examples of where they have concerns, whether in relation to shared services, driving innovation and efficiency, or in wanting to enable councils to be more entrepreneurial. These are complex issues that need careful consideration, which I'll be taking forward as a matter of priority. What is pleasing, however, is the degree of commonality there is between central and local government on concerns, issues, and thinking. Now, up until this point, I've described processes which are all, one might say, within the world of public service delivery. But even with real enhanced powers of scrutiny by elected local councillors, we can ask whether these changes will be sufficient to drive the public service reform we need. It remains a challenge to ask people themselves to reinvent in a fundamental way the current work they do. So the fifth strand of report must be to open these processes outwards, to allow those outside public services, as well as those inside, to examine what is happening and to propose alternative ways of doing things. And this can only happen if the necessary information and data about what is currently delivered is easily and readily available. The Prime Minister has highlighted the importance of an open data policy as part of our broader efforts towards democratic renewal, creating a culture in which government information is accessible and useful to as many people as possible in order to help build public trust in the way that information is used. Public data is an essential tool in creating pressure to drive improvements in public services on the old principle that knowledge is power. It puts information and therefore power in the hands of users, service providers and would-be providers, including social enterprises. People able to compare the outcomes and costs for their own local services with the services delivered elsewhere, and also able to suggest means of improving and driving change. There are obvious close links with the concept of total place here, helping to cut out duplication and waste and making sure that every pound works as hard as it can. Making public data available enables people to reuse it in different and more imaginative ways than may have been originally intended. And estimates suggested that this could generate as much as £1 billion a year for the UK economy. Public data can ensure inconsistency, so that residents in Hackney can compare their services with Kent and Lancashire as easily as with their neighbours in Haringey. Making public data public should not be optional for local authorities. It is essential to their role as accountable leaders in modern democratic institutions. Openness of data is as important for local government as it is for national government, making people more connected to their community and giving them the tools to demand action on issues that matter. Digitalising council records can mean that citizens can find out everything from the council accounts to the number of street lights and community wardens to when the rubbish is collected and the hedges trimmed. The work that Sir Tim Berners-Lee and Professor Nigel Shadbolt are doing needs to extend across the whole public sector, and I'm working with them to ensure that their work embraces local government and local services, and that local government responds quickly, consistently and effectively to the challenge. Finally, there's been strong support for the concept of a joint committee of both Houses of Parliament to keep central-local government relations under regular scrutiny. This idea was first proposed by the CLG Select Committee. Its establishment would, of course, be a matter for Parliament, not ministers, but there is clearly a lot of sense in it. So that then is the landscape of local reform, a willingness to look afresh at all local public service spending in each area, to create between central and local services the culture which enables real innovation and change, to ensure that strong, accountable local councils are at the centre of leading delivery, shaping or scrutinising local services, to enable councillors to scrutinise every aspect of local public service provision, to open up the information about public services to public scrutiny and to enable those outside to propose new ways of doing things, to give local councils the powers to innovate and be entrepreneurial and develop new sources of income. It is, I think, an attractive vision. I think it is also a very different vision to that of the Conservative opposition. And let me summarise why in practice and in principle this approach is so different. Of course, in the short term, we have very different views of the role of local government in the downturn. At the beginning of this year, David Cameron called for my department's budget, which obviously is all spent through local government, to be cut by over £1 billion this year. Most of this would have come from housing. By contrast, because we believe that the public sector needs to carry on taking the lead while the private sector is sluggish, we have increased investment in housing by about £1.5 billion this year. And local authorities have also bid very successfully for the Future Jobs Fund, creating over 100,000 jobs for young people. Indeed, we live with the bizarre contribution that many Conservative councils are bidding enthusiastically for Labour government investment, often indeed complaining it is not enough, while working actively for the election of Conservative government, which would slash the same spending immediately and with huge damage to the local and national economy. The future pressures on public spending will be determined not just by the level of borrowing, but by the rate of economic growth. And here again, Conservative policy simply fails to recognise the importance of the local authority economic development role. They're committed to abolishing regional development agencies and the regional framework for economic planning that goes with them. The now notorious letter from Caroline Spellman, which is intended to encourage local Conservative councils to tear up plans for new housing and business development by delaying developments and refusing to implement planning guidelines, showed a willingness to damage growth for narrow and local party populist advantage. As the House Builders Federation said at the time, hard-pressed first-time buyers and those on the growing waiting list for social housing would suffer in particular. The timing is unfortunate. Housing providers have been through the worst downturn in living memory, and the letter would lead to a hiatus in planning for housing that could only exacerbate the supply crisis we already face. But thirdly, and crucially, for the future of local services, the Conservatives couple the localisation of power with the abandonment of any concept of or commitment to the standards of services citizens have a right to enjoy. This is like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's a charter to make the postcode lottery the founding principle of conservatism in local government. David Cameron's commitment to allow local councils to do whatever they want as long as it's within the law turns out to be the green light for Barnett's Ryanair Council, in which citizens have to pay twice, once in tax and once in an extra tax, to get a decent service. The starting point for all I've been talking about this evening is the individual citizen and the service they will receive. In Labour's vision, powerful local government will play an essential role in ensuring that citizens receive their entitlements to a consistently good standard of public services as we set out in building Britain's future. The aim is to move away from a system primarily based on central direction and targets to one where citizens have enforceable entitlements to public services and means of redress where they are not delivered. The scrutiny powers of local councils will play a critical role here, recommending support or intervention where entitlements are not being delivered by service providers. Through petitions or other means, citizens should be able to demand action from their council if they believe those entitlements are not being met. And as we start to develop the concept of entitlements in practice, we'll need to go further still in freeing councils from targets and inspection to give them the flexibility they need to respond locally. The first test of this may be in delivering the vision for social care which the Prime Minister has set out, where people, wherever they live in the country, should have their needs assessed and be met appropriately through high-quality public services. But how those services are delivered may vary, reflecting the fact that delivering social care or other services is very different in a rural setting than it is in a very dense inner city. In that way, it is possible to promote innovative and creative approaches to service delivery, but without resulting in an unacceptable postcode lottery, because we have built in a universal entitlement to a standard of service. This is, I think, a sharp contrast to the alternative view, where the rhetoric of better public services is not matched by excellence in delivery, where variation in service delivery is not linked to the varying demands across an area, but whether you can afford to pay twice and whether or not you get a service at all. So beneath the surface, where all parties seem to favour localism, there are some sharp choices, as sharp as any others in politics, to be made at the next election. My vision of strong local government at the heart of providing innovative and better value public services is not an end in itself. In the context of tighter public finances, it offers the best opportunity of delivering better services for less public money. As I've described today, that will mean a radically different role for local authorities in future, and I look forward to working with them as we realise this vision. Thank you.